Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is in an interesting circumstance. It's one that happens to every public figure who becomes famous. But the thing is, most people don't become as famous as Ocasio has become as quickly as she has become. And when that happens, you end up with this strange concoction of someone who I believe is underprepared, not necessarily for Congress, but underprepared for media situations, as Ocasio is. And I think that's what happened with Jake Tapper in a recent interview on CNN. What we're going to go through here is a series of mostly unforced errors by Ocasio in this conversation. Things that she and her team around her definitely have to work on. Because for reasons that are, I believe, utterly insane, she has become the standard bearer for all things liberal in America for a very strange reason. Just because she's exciting, and I think part of it is she's exciting and she's pretty and she's young and it's new energy, and I think all that plays into this. So she's being asked for about things that are outside of her scope, and she's speaking to things in a way that's not as crisp as they should be. And I think a guy like Jake Tapper, who's taking every chance he can to catch some headlines, to catch some attention, took advantage of it here.
Now is House Democratic candidate and rising progressive star, pardon me, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Her mother is from Puerto Rico, and she had family in Puerto Rico during the hurricane. Alexandria, thanks so much for joining us. The president continuing to send these tweets disputing the official government death toll from Hurricane Maria and blaming Democrats for inventing those numbers. I know this is personal for you. You tweeted that your grandfather died in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of the storm. I'm so sorry for your loss. Can you tell us what happened?
Okay, so before we get into her answer, Jake really threw out like 3 different questions there. So I think that it's tough for anyone who's in that circumstance to zero in on one, but that's what someone who is constantly on national TV has to do. They have to zero in on one and sort of use that one answer to answer the 3 or 4 different questions in his setup. Boy, he squeezed a lot into that 30 seconds.
Well, I think what happened in my family is what happened to thousands of Puerto Ricans, where in the neglect and government inaction, there was so little response, so little connection. You don't know whether a hospital lost power. My grandfather was in a medical facility and he had passed away in the middle of the night. The people who pass away in these storms are the most vulnerable. They are children with illnesses. They are elderly. And when power is not restored, when infrastructure is not taken seriously, these are the first people who pass away in storms. And what we saw in Puerto Rico was a mass death of 3,000 people. It was the worst humanitarian crisis in modern American history. And many, many people impacted by this storm point to government inaction as the cause of death.
Okay, so there's 2 things that happened there. She set it up pretty well. She personalized it as she was asked to, speaking about her grandfather and speaking about the elderly. But also, she did make an error. And the error here was that she owned the 3,000 number. The 3,000 number, we don't know how strong that number. I heard that number a couple weeks ago. It sounded a little weird to me how they calculated it, because it wasn't just from the storm. It was from the months that followed the storm. And it was like also it was a weird estimate. But that doesn't matter at this point. She's now owned this. That's Alexandria's number now. Now, Here's the thing that I tell everyone that I've prepped to go into an interview. Don't present a fact. Don't present a concept that you're not ready to defend. Don't do it. Don't do it. Because any interviewer worth their salt will ask you a very simple follow-up, and that follow-up will become hard. Because if you're not ready to defend that number, you should not bring it up.
Now, the Trump administration will respond to comments like the one you just made by saying that FEMA was on the ground. They were doing as much as they could. The infrastructure on the island was already badly damaged because of years, if not decades, of neglect by politicians in Puerto Rico and the United States. What did you make of the president's tweets?
Well, I think first and foremost, there is a systemic issue here, and that is the modern-day colonial relationship that the United States has with Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans.
Okay. But I'll just stop her there, and we'll go back a little bit. So she presents in her answer there. She didn't have to go there, but she instantly did. She instantly made it an issue of colonialism and the relationship between the U.S. and Puerto Rico. I'm not saying she's wrong. I honestly don't know a ton about the issue, but once you present that in an environment like this, Tapper's ears are going to start to ring, and his eyes are about to get red, and he's going to want to know more and want to know why you are presenting a concept like that. And as I said earlier, don't present concepts that you're not ready to defend. Tapper's simply going to ask her to defend her concept. It's not going to go well.
And the United States. What did you make of the president's tweets?
Well, I think first and foremost, there is a systemic issue here, and that is the modern-day colonial relationship that the United States has with Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans are technically American citizens, but they do not have the right to vote. They are treated in completely different ways as normal American citizens are, and for that reason, you do have the chronic neglect of the island. And it is acute situations like this in which Puerto Ricans continue to be treated like second-class citizens. Puerto Rico was given a fraction of the FEMA recovery as Houston, for example, in Hurricane Harvey. We have Hurricane Irma. We have Hurricane Sandy. And this is not just an issue of the colonial status of Puerto Rico, but it is also an issue of us not treating and dedicating enough resources to addressing climate change enough either.
And when you say that...
Okay. Once again, she presents it as Puerto Rico being a second-class state, second-class community in the United States, and Tapper's simply going to try to get a little bit of clarity, because when you present something like that, that's a really big concept. You better be ready to defend it, and I think was her first mistake here.
They don't have the right to vote. You mean they don't have the right to vote for members of the House that can vote on the floor, and they don't have two senators, because obviously they have the right to vote. I mean,
Puerto Ricans have no right to vote in federal elections.
Okay.
They cannot choose a president. They do not have a vote they don't have a representative vote in the House or the Senate, which means that they did not even have the capacity to choose for this president, yet they continue to suffer at the hands of this administration.
So I want to move on. You endorsed progressive candidate Cynthia Nixon in the Democratic primary for governor of New York. She lost on Thursday to Governor Andrew Cuomo by a whopping 31 points. Now, I know progressive candidates have had plenty of other victories, including yours, but Governor Cuomo said that your progressive wave was, quote, not even a ripple. He called your primary win a, quote, fluke, and he asked on Friday, quote, where was that effect yesterday? What's your response to Governor Cuomo?
Well,
okay, that's a very, very, very tough question, and a very long question also. Okay, so she's going to be asked to defend a candidate, that she did support. tangentially, as part of this larger meme of far left candidates being successful. Now, there's another thing I tell everyone who I speak to about speaking to the media. When a media member presents you with a question, answer the freaking question. And I don't know why Ocasio-Cortez didn't seem ready to answer this question, because it seems like a pretty easy one to see coming. But she didn't. It seems as if she thought that this one didn't need preparation, or maybe someone around her didn't approach her and say, hey, look, you're going to be asked about Cynthia Nixon. And also Tapper had some extra ammo there, lost by 31 points in your district. And this one didn't come off as smoothly as I think Ocasio would like.
Well, I mean, I always take I'm always down to go toe-to-toe sometimes, but I think when you actually look at the numbers that we focused on, every single down-ballot progressive candidate in my district, New York 14, won. New York had a profound tidal change, really, in the Democratic Party. 1 out of every 5 Democratic senators got replaced on Thursday night, and the path to eliminating the IDC was through New York 14 in my district. So I'm proud to say that every single locally endorsed candidate that we mobilized for won our election.
Right.
Cynthia Nixon did a phenomenal job.
She lost your district by 30 points.
Right. But we focused on our local candidates and we focused on the legislatures. But, I think that what she did was that she centered a lot of phenomenal issues. She centered racial justice. She centered criminal justice reform. She centered the legalization of marijuana, single-payer health care, and a lot of down-ballot candidates benefited from that. And what I also look forward to moving forward is us rallying behind all Democratic nominees, including the governor, to make sure that he wins in November.
Okay, so I think she needed to invert her response there. I think you need to address Nixon up front by saying, hey, look, Cynthia Nixon presented herself. She fought it was a hard fought fight for her, but Cynthia didn't win, and you can't win every election. Or just concede the Cynthia piece first. You can't really duck the mathematical element of this. So I wouldn't try to. But I would address it first. Don't wait to address it. Address it first. Say that Cynthia lost. And hey, look, I hope she runs again because I think she was a great candidate. But yes, she did lose. We did, but that was one of many races that happened on Tuesday. Or on Thursday in this case, and we are going to attempt to win those other races. We won a lot of those other races with highly progressive candidates. We're going to change the New York State Senate. It's not about you could go and say, hey, it's not about one candidate, and if Andrew Cuomo would like to debate me on the issues, if you want to engage Andrew Cuomo, I would engage him on the issues directly, not sort of flippantly as you do up front, but say, hey, look, my race was no fluke, and if Andrew Cuomo would like to deal with me, hey, let's do it. Let's discuss issues of the state. Let's discuss things. I think she needed to address Cuomo first and Cuomo and Nixon first instead of later. By waiting, Tapper got impatient and Tapper threw in another jab, which made her look poorly.
Platform has called for various new programs, including Medicare for All, housing as a federal right, a federal jobs guarantee, tuition-free public college, canceling all student loan debt. According to nonpartisan and left-leaning studies friendly to your cause, including the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities or the Tax Policy Center, the overall price tag is more than $40 trillion in the next decade. You recently said in an interview that increasing taxes on the very wealthy plus an increased corporate tax rate would make $2 trillion over the next 10 years. So where's the other $38 trillion going to come from?
Well,
Okay. So, step one, that's not well, I wouldn't necessarily call it a trap question. It's definitely a question that speaks to a level of skepticism. And I think this one was something that I think Ocasio Cortez got blasted for online, her answer here. But I actually thought it wasn't bad. I didn't think she quite framed it well. I think she needed to say something more to the effect of, hey, look, we as a nation have to make a choice about who we are and what we believe and what matters to us. And I believe that all these things matter to us, and I am willing to make a commitment to the people of this country by investing in them. Now, as for the numbers specifically, it is a bridge that we must cross. But I would start by, have a couple numbers at heart. Things like defense spending, things like government efficiency. And then you can go into the deeper water that she travels into rather quickly.
The things that we need to realize when we look at something like Medicare for All would save the American people a very large amount of money. And what we see as well is that these systems are not just pie in the sky. Many of them are accomplished by every modern civilized democracy in the Western world. The United Kingdom has a form of single-payer health care. Canada, France, Germany. What we need to realize is that these investments are better and they are good for our future. These are generational investments so that they're not short-term Band-Aids, but they are really profound decisions about who we want to be as a nation and how we want to act as the wealthiest nation in the history of the world.
Right.
Now, once again, she's inverting her answers. I think she has to present this as a matter of philosophy and a matter of as she said at the very end, who we want to be as the wealthiest nation in the world. I think she could say something as simple as we're the wealthiest nation on earth. And I think that we need to make a larger commitment to the greater population. And I think we need to reshape government to fit this. How we reshape government, I don't know offhand. I don't know offhand, and I want to work with other members of my party and on the other side of the aisle to figure out how we reshape government in order to achieve this. But I do know that this is the end goal. We need to reshape our world in the image of the proposals that I'm suggesting. Something to that effect. I think you have to address the money because if you don't, you end up with a Chiron like the one on the screen right now. Studies Ocasio-Cortez policy would cost estimated $40 trillion without a defense, and you're left scrambling as Tapper goes back at you with not even really hard follow-ups, but sort of semi hard follow-ups.
I get that, but the price tag for everything that you've laid out in your campaign is $40 trillion over the next 10 years. I understand that Medicare for All would cost more to some wealthier people and to the government and to taxpayers while also reducing individual health care expenditures. But I'm talking about the overall package. You say it's not pie in the sky, but $40 trillion is quite a bit of money. And the taxes that you talked about raising to pay for this, to pay for your agenda, only count for 2. And we're going by left-leaning analysts.
Right. Well, when you look at...
Okay. So she's got to be ready to come right back at him or anyone who challenges her with a stat there. That something that says that her ideas have some grounding in the financial reality that we're in. Or that, hey, look, we're spending, $30 trillion here in just 1 year. What if we didn't spend that for a couple of years? I think defense spending is massive, for example. So I think she's got to be a bit sharper in punching back. Instead, she kind of got muddled quick.
Again, how our health care works. Currently, we pay much of these costs go into the private sector. So what we see is, for example, a year ago, I was working downtown in a restaurant. I went around and I asked how many of you folks have health insurance. Not a single person did, because they would have had to have paid $200 a month for a payment for insurance that had an $8,000 deductible. What these represent are lower costs overall for these programs. And additionally, what this is a broader agenda. We do know and we acknowledge that there are political realities. They don't always happen with just the wave of a wand, but we can work to make these things happen. And in fact, when you look at the economic activity that it spurs, for example, if you look at my generation, millennials, the amount of economic activity that we do not engage in, the fact that we delay purchasing homes, that we don't participate in the economy and purchasing cars, et cetera, as fully as possible, is a cost. It is an externality, if you will, of unprecedented amounts of student loan debt.
I'm assuming I'm not going to get an answer for the other $38 trillion, but...
Damn. Look, Jake was being snarky there, and honestly, I wish she punched right back. Hey, look, Jake, I'm plotting the direction. This is my North Star, and how we get there, that's a much longer, more in-depth conversation that I'm studying, that I'm learning about, that I'm interested in, and don't you dare not take me seriously when I discuss these issues. Something to that effect. Instead, she sort of let it pass as he kind of made her look like a joke.
We'll have you back, and maybe we can go over that. But I do want to ask you about some breaking news here, because you've been a major supporter of the Me Too movement. You have also expressed the need for caution in the past. You said, quote, "We also need to make sure that due process is held." There's this new accusation this week from an anonymous woman about Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh from an incident more than 35 years ago. It was leaked to the press by Democrats. Do you think Brett Kavanaugh deserves the benefit of the doubt here?
I think that I believe, well, first of all, Brett Kavanaugh should not be confirmed to the Supreme Court under any circumstances, whether regardless and independent.
Right. But what about
this?
But what about this case, on this case with this anonymous accusation?
Well, I certainly think that one of the aspects of due process is that we have to hear these things out, and he should certainly not be confirmed before this is explored.
So you think that, and do you think an anonymous accusation is enough? What if the woman decides that she does not want to come forward? There are a lot of people who think that the kind of due process you've called for has not happened here. This was not raised in the public confirmation hearing. It was not raised in the written requests for comment. It was not raised in the private closed session. There is a process for this to happen. The Democrats had this information in July, but it didn't come out until a few days ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again,
This is where you definitely gotta go back to your point, just reiterate your point, and don't let him shove you off your mark.
I think that really, when we talk about process and due process and justice, it must center on the victim. I cannot say what should be done and what should not be done, because what we need to make sure is that there is due justice for the victim in this case.
Oh, she kind of spun herself like a top there. She needed to say, "Hey, look, I think she needed to stick." She had to stick with her first statement there, which is we need due process in the circumstances. We have to hear out the victim. And I think you also have to make a choice there, whether it's anonymous or not. You got to choose. And she doesn't. Instead, she sort of starts spinning her wheels here.
A lot of that depends on if she wants to come forward, if she chooses to remain anonymous, or frankly, when it comes to behaviors like sexual assault, it's about power. And often when it comes to behaviors of sexual assault, they are not one-off incidents, they are repeated. So perhaps
now you're making another very, very strong accusation that you cannot back up. Now you're essentially saying that he's a serial sexual assaulter. You can't do that in that circumstance. No, you don't jump to that conclusion. You got to kind of chill out. I think she's scrambling through her head, trying to find an answer here, when the answer is right in front. When she already said her answer, she just needed to stick to it.
This woman chooses to remain anonymous, but if her account is true, there could potentially be other victims out there that are scared to come forward, and this could potentially be an act of solidarity and for them to air that out if they exist.
But does the accused deserve any due process as well?
Well, due process is about justice for all folks involved, and when we have a lack of process, then we have a lack of justice for both victims.
That was a great line. I wish she said that about a minute and a half earlier.
And the accused. But what is going on right now is that there is not due process, and we're looking at brushing a potentially an extremely concerning incident under the rug, which should not be occurring, especially when it comes to a Supreme Court nomination in which the Republican Party has already demonstrated that they will not disclose, or they will not really unseal a lot of the documents, which they frankly demanded of Democratic nominees for the Supreme Court. They wanted to make sure that, look at what they put Merrick Garland through. Look at what they put Sonia Sotomayor through. Yet they want to kind of hide almost everything about Brett Kavanaugh's history. And so I think that what this is that this is part of a pattern. And it is a pattern of keeping this nominee in the dark ahead of his nomination.
All right, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thank you so much for...
Okay, so... Look, I think I want everyone out there who's watching or listening to this to not get me wrong here. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a blue chip candidate. I think she's got a lot of skills, and I think she could certainly be, whether it's mayor of New York City, governor of New York, maybe a senator, or who knows, maybe even president someday. I think she needs to have a better team around her. She needs to have communications people around her who are constantly coaching her, constantly working her out, constantly keeping her up to date with things like this, things that are obvious concepts that are going to be brought up in interviews. Like, it's not like he asked her to solve an equation. He asked her something that was painfully obvious. Something that she definitely needed to know and be ready for. It's not like it was shocking. She has to be better prepared. And for now, I'm James Brown. I bid you good night.